The real-life horror of a kidnapping is something that words can hardly capture, yet when told through the perspective of those who endured it, the story becomes hauntingly unforgettable. Imagine the sinking feeling of a normal day suddenly turning into a nightmare, where trust in the safety of the world around you shatters in an instant. A kidnapping is not just a crime of force, it is a sudden tearing apart of security, comfort, and freedom. It begins subtly, sometimes with an ordinary walk down a familiar street or the sound of footsteps closing in from behind. What starts as a routine moment transforms into the kind of fear that grips the soul and leaves lasting scars. In this story, you will witness how quickly life can change from calm to chaos, and how terror has a way of consuming every breath, every thought, every second. What makes such horrors even more frightening is the reality that it could happen to anyone. Kidnapping stories are not confined to fiction or the pages of a crime novel. They are the chilling truths faced by people every day, real events that unfold in our world when darkness preys upon the unsuspecting. The victim in this story was not seeking danger, not inviting risk, not stepping into reckless territory. They were simply living their life, unaware that a predator was lurking in the shadows. That is what makes this story different. It is not entertainment, it is not imagination, it is reality painted vividly through animations so you can feel the heartbeat, the dread, and the weight of those terrifying minutes. Every detail in this retelling reminds us of how fragile our daily routines are. The victim's fear becomes your fear, their silence becomes deafening in your ears. The clink of a lock, the creak of a door, the muffled sound of breathing, all of these transform from harmless sounds into signals of danger when survival is at stake. It is this realism that grips the audience and refuses to let go, forcing us to confront truths we often prefer to ignore. When you realize this is not a made-up tale but an account rooted in reality, the horror intensifies. Suddenly, the story is no longer theirs but feels like it could one day be yours or someone you love. What heightens the dread is the unpredictable nature of such a crime. A kidnapping is not just about being taken up, it is about not knowing what happens next. The victim's mind races with endless questions. Will I escape? Will anyone find me? Is this the end? These thoughts are not dramatized, they are the raw, real emotions that grip anyone trapped in such a nightmare. Through the story, you come face to face with the human vulnerability we often take for granted. The real-life horror lies not only in the kidnapping itself, but in the aftermath it leaves behind. Even after the escape or rescue, the trauma lingers like an unwelcome shadow. Trust is shattered, normal life feels like a fragile illusion, and fear becomes a constant companion. This story is not just about being kidnapped, it is about how a single horrifying event can change a life forever. The abduction itself is the turning point where a nightmare becomes reality, and everything changes in the blink of an eye. It begins with the sudden disruption, often so quick and unexpected that the victim barely has time to process what is happening. One moment, there is normalcy, the sound of footsteps on a familiar street, the glow of streetlights, or even the quiet hum of passing cars. Then, without warning, that calmness is shattered by the presence of someone with dark intentions. A hand on the shoulder, a sudden grip around the arm, or the startling pressure of being pulled into a vehicle. These are the terrifying moments that redefine fear. In this story, the abduction doesn't happen slowly, it is a violent, shocking act designed to disorient, overpower, and control. The horror of an abduction lies not just in the physical act but in the psychological storm it unleashes. For the victim, every second feels unreal, as if the mind is trying to convince itself that this can't be happening. The instinct to scream, to run, to fight, collides with the sheer panic of being trapped. Imagine the cold metal of the car door closing, the suffocating darkness of being hidden from sight, or the muffled sound of the world continuing as if nothing happened. That isolation becomes unbearable because it reinforces one chilling truth: the victim has been stolen from their life. Details like the roughness of the kidnapper's grip, the smell of gasoline inside the vehicle, the sound of tires screeching as the world blurs past, all of these sensations imprint themselves deeply, turning into a living memory of terror. The abduction scene is not just about being physically taken, it's about being stripped of freedom in a way that leaves one powerless. Every attempt to resist seems to provoke more danger, every cry for help swallowed by the indifference of the night. This is what makes it so haunting. The realization that the world around continues as normal while, for the victim, everything is collapsing. Fear grows rapidly during this stage because uncertainty is its strongest fuel. The victim doesn't know where they are being taken, who the abductor is, or what their intentions are. Is this about ransom, revenge, something worse? The unanswered questions make the journey more horrifying than the act itself. In the silence of that forest ride, the victim's imagination becomes its own tormentor, painting worst-case scenarios that feel closer to reality with each passing moment. The abduction doesn't just capture the body, it captures the mind, pushing it into a spiral of panic and helplessness. The abduction also represents a loss of identity in the eyes of the kidnapper. To them, the victim is no longer a person with dreams, family, or individuality. They are simply an object to be controlled. That dehumanization deepens the horror, because the victim feels unseen, unheard, and reduced to nothing more than a possession. For the audience, watching this animated sequence forces a confrontation with how cruel and cold such moments can be. But what makes this abduction particularly unforgettable is the emotional weight it carries. It is not just about being taken off, it is about the shattering realization that safety is gone, replaced by a darkness that is both physical and emotional. The abduction is the moment when hope begins to flicker, when survival becomes the only thought, and when every heartbeat feels like it could be the last. This is the raw, unfiltered terror that defines the true horror of being kidnapped. The desperate escape is the most intense and nerve-wracking part of any kidnapping story because it is the moment when survival collides with courage. For the victim, this stage is not just about breaking free, it is about overcoming fear, seizing opportunity, and fighting against overwhelming odds. Every second becomes precious, every sound feels magnified, and every movement could be the difference between freedom and captivity forever. The escape is never easy. It is layered with uncertainty, hesitation, and the constant terror of being caught again. Yet within that fear lies a spark of determination, the will to live, and the refusal to surrender to the darkness. In this story, the escape begins with observation. The victim studies their surroundings, memorizes details, and waits for the slightest weakness in their captor's control. Perhaps it is a moment when the kidnapper turns away, a forgotten key left on a table, or a door that isn't locked as tightly as it should be. In those tiny cracks of opportunity, hope begins to flicker. The victim's heart races, their hands tremble, but their mind focuses. This is the chance, and it may never come again. The desperation to act outweighs the fear of failure. The physical act of escaping is filled with silent suspense. Imagine the trembling hands slowly turning a doorknob, the creak of a floorboard sounding like thunder in the silence, or the struggle of quietly removing restraints. Each small step feels like walking on the edge of disaster. The victim knows that one wrong move could alert the captor and end any hope of survival. But courage pushes them forward, step by careful step, fueled by the thought of life beyond those walls. The escape attempt is more than physical, it is a test of mental strength, patience, and the ability to suppress fear long enough to act. The outside world becomes the ultimate goal, but reaching it is never simple. Darkness might cloak the surroundings, turning every shadow into a potential threat. Every corner holds the fear of running straight into the kidnapper again. The pounding of footsteps, whether real or imaginative, drives the victim forward, heart in their throat, lungs burning with the effort to stay quiet but move quickly. The victim's body may be weak from captivity, but adrenaline becomes their greatest weapon, giving strength they didn't know they had. What makes the desperate escape so powerful is the emotional storm swirling inside the victim. It is not just about leaving a physical space, it is about clawing back their freedom, their dignity, their very existence. Every step toward the exit is a rebellion against the fear that once held them captive. The thought of family, loved ones, or simply the chance to see daylight again becomes the fuel that pushes them through the terror. It is in this moment that the will to survive burns brightest, outshining the shadows of despair. Yet the escape is not guaranteed. The constant dread of being discovered lingers until the final moment of freedom. Even when the victim reaches outside, their mind races. Am I truly safe? Will they chase me down? Is this really the end? This lingering fear keeps the tension alive, reminding us that escape is not just about breaking free physically, it is about learning to believe in safety again. The desperate escape is more than a thrilling climax, it is a celebration of resilience. It shows that even in the darkest situations, human strength and determination can rise above fear. For the audience, this moment becomes unforgettable, leaving them breathless, hopeful, and deeply connected to the survivor's journey. The hidden twists are what transform an already terrifying kidnapping story into something even more haunting and unforgettable. Just when the victim or the audience believes they understand the situation, reality shifts, and a new layer of horror reveals itself. These twists are not only about shocking surprises but about the cruel unpredictability of human behavior. They expose how fragile safety can be, how quickly trust can shatter, and how nothing in a kidnapping is ever as simple as it seems. In this story, the hidden twists are what elevate the fear, keeping the victim trapped not only by physical restraints but also by confusion, betrayal, and the constant fear of the unknown. One of the most chilling aspects of such twists is the involvement of people the victim might never suspect. Sometimes the abductor is not a stranger lurking in the shadows but someone who was once close, someone trusted, or even a figure of authority. The shock of realizing that the danger was hiding behind a familiar face deepens the trauma. This betrayal cuts deeper than physical pain because it leaves the victim questioning everything they once believed. The thought that safety and danger can come from the same person is a psychological twist that continues to haunt long after the ordeal. Another kind of hidden twist lies in the motives of the kidnapper. At first, it may seem like a crime driven by money, such as ransom. But as the story unfolds, darker and more disturbing reasons often come to light: obsession, revenge, or psychological games that have nothing to do with money at all. The victim begins to understand that their suffering is not accidental but deliberate, designed to fulfill the twisted desires of their captor. This realization shifts the fear into something deeper, because how can you reason with someone whose motives are rooted in madness? The escape itself often carries hidden dangers. Just when the victim feels free, believing they have broken away from their captor, a shocking twist can pull them right back into danger. Perhaps the kidnapper anticipated their move and set the trap, or maybe freedom was an illusion designed to crush their hope. These cruel turns remind us that in the world of abduction, nothing can be trusted, not even the feeling of safety. For the victim, this roller coaster of hope and despair becomes a test of endurance, forcing them to summon strength they didn't know they possessed. Sometimes the twist is not about the kidnapper at all but about the victim's own mind. Under extreme trauma, the brain can create false senses of time, distorted memories, or even hallucinations. The victim may doubt their own senses, unsure whether the threats are real or imagined. This psychological warfare adds another layer of horror, making the escape not just a physical challenge but a mental battle for clarity and truth. The final hidden twist often comes in the aftermath. Even after the victim is free, they discover that the kidnapping has left scars that cannot be seen but are deeply felt. Nightmares, paranoia, and the constant fear of being watched or taken again linger like shadows that refuse to fade. Freedom does not erase the fear, it only highlights how much has been lost. This emotional revelation is perhaps the most powerful twist of all, because it shows that survival does not mean the story is over. The hidden twists keep the audience locked in suspense, forcing them to realize that safety is never guaranteed and that horror can come from the least expected places. It is these revelations that make the story unforgettable, leaving both the victim and the viewers forever changed. The emotional impact of a kidnapping horror story is what lingers long after the physical ordeal has ended. Unlike cuts and bruises that eventually fade, the scars left on the mind and heart remain deeply etched, shaping the victim's life in ways that outsiders can barely comprehend. For the victim, every moment of captivity becomes a memory that replays over and over again, turning into sleepless nights, intrusive thoughts, and an unshakable fear of the world around them. The emotional pain is not confined to the hours or days spent with the kidnapper, it stretches far beyond, touching every part of their future, from relationships to trust, from confidence to the simple feeling of safety. One of the most immediate impacts is trauma, a heavy weight that sits in the chest and refuses to move. Victims often relive the abduction in flashbacks, triggered by ordinary things like the sound of footsteps, the slam of a car door, or even the sight of certain places. These triggers drag them back into the nightmare, forcing them to feel the fear all over again as if it were happening in the present. It is not just memory, it is relived terror, raw and unfiltered. This kind of emotional wound is invisible to others, which makes it even harder to explain or heal. Trust, once broken, is another casualty of kidnapping. A victim who once felt comfortable walking home at night or speaking to strangers may now live in constant suspicion. Even loved ones can become difficult to trust because the victim's mind has been rewired to expect betrayal or danger at every corner. The sense of community and safety that once defined their life turns into isolation and weariness. In many ways, the kidnapping does not end when the victim escapes up, it follows them, shaping their interactions with every new person they meet. The emotional toll also includes guilt and self-blame. Many victims struggle with questions like, why me? Could I have fought harder? Could I have escaped sooner? These thoughts eat away at self-worth, creating feelings of shame that should never belong to the victim. The cruel truth is that these emotions are part of the trauma, adding layers of pain to an already unbearable memory. For the audience, this aspect of the story highlights how deeply unfair and lasting the consequences of such crimes can be. The emotional impact is not limited to the victim alone. Families, friends, and communities also feel the aftershocks. Parents may grow overprotective, siblings may live in fear, and communities may lose their sense of peace. A single act of violence spreads ripples far and wide, affecting countless lives. For the victim, this awareness of how their suffering affects others can create another emotional burden, as they feel responsible for the pain their loved ones endure. And yet, within this darkness, there is also resilience. Some victims find strength in survival, turning their trauma into a story of courage. The emotional impact, while devastating, can also serve as a reminder of human endurance, the ability to face unimaginable horror and still stand afterward. It is this combination of vulnerability and strength that makes such stories resonate deeply with audiences. They are not just tales of fear, but of the human spirit's refusal to be broken. In the end, the emotional impact is what makes a true kidnapping horror story unforgettable. It is not the chains, the locked doors, or the terrifying escape that stays with us. The long guest, it is the invisible scars, the heavy silence, and the reminder that safety is something we often take for granted until it is stolen. That is why this story is more than just horror, it is a mirror held up to the fragility of life, showing us how deeply a single moment can change everything forever.